Here we are, the true beginning, the first edition core rulebook that began it all, Vampire the Masquerade. Available as a softcover book and released by White Wolf on July 4th, 1991, it is an interesting read from a historic perspective, but not without its issues. There's a strong sense of revision happening throughout that didn't quite reach all sections, causing a number of contradictions. Things don't always mesh with how the setting is described, the mix-up of character names, and so on. I have noted examples of this where applicable. A good quality PDF is available through DriveThruRPG for this title, and though most old White Wolf books are available via their print-on-demand program, this is not one of them. The only copies available physically are old printings of the book, and finding one in good quality can be tricky. Many of the available copies are well used, even if well loved. My copy that I acquired through eBay bears a history all its own, covered as it is in nebulous ink and grease stains and other marks from handling and games over more than 30 years of existence. The book acted as the first step for many into what would ultimately be known as the World of Darkness. The book bears the now iconic single rose on green marble of its cover alongside the title, the back providing further flavor. A storytelling game of personal horror, it informs us. Here we are greeted with a quote. "No one holds command over me, no man, no god, no prince. What is a claim of age for ones who are immortal? What is a claim of power for ones who defy death? Call your damnable hunt. We shall see who I drag screaming to hell with me." This is attributed to Gunther Dorn from Das Ungeheuer darin, which can be translated as the monster inside, or, as was likely intended, transliterated to the beast within, a primary theme of Vampire. This appears to be a made-up quote, so it could be attributed to an in-world character or work, though I am not aware of any reference to it otherwise. Opening to the title page, we're greeted with a stark drawing of a cityscape at night, the sky overcast and lightning striking amidst the buildings. Following this are the credits. Credited with the writing of the book, we have the creator, Mark Ryan-Hagan, joined by Graham Davis, Tom Dowd, Lisa Stevens, and Stuart Wieck. Credited with the art in the book, we have Tim Bradstreet, Chris McDonough, Ed McKeag, Ron Spencer, Richard Thomas, and Josh Timbrook. This first book, and the game as a whole, is dedicated to the poet, playwright, and former president of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. This is followed by a quote from a speech he gave to the U.S. Congress. "We are still under the sway of the destructive and vain belief that man is the pinnacle of creation and not just a part of it, and that, therefore, everything is permitted. We are incapable of understanding that the only genuine backbone of our actions, if they are to be moral, is responsibility. Responsibility to something higher than my family, my country, my firm, my success. Responsibility to the order of being, where all our actions are indelibly recorded and where, and only where, they will be properly judged." With that, we enter the world of darkness, whereupon we are greeted by our first of many iconic images from Tim Bradstreet, this one of a Nosferatu, accompanied by a pronunciation guide, something that would intentionally be left out of future books. Our introduction follows. A letter dated January 3rd to W.H. from your most devoted servant, and signed Semper Severus VT. Context clues throughout the letter point to this being none other than a letter from Lad Tepes, aka Dracula, to Wilhelmina Harker, the wife of Jonathan Harker, the main character of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. In the letter, he offers condolences for the death of her husband and apologizes to her, seeking atonement for his past actions, claiming time and nature both struggle to extinguish his humanity, and that he must guard his soul as well as any priest, as any lapse in vigilance lets in the beast. As part of this atonement, he sends along with the letter a document which he claims giving to her makes him a traitor to his own kind. The phrase implies that the section which follows is Dracula laying the secrets of vampires bare to her in supplication. Leading directly off of Dracula's letter, he speaks in this document of the origins of his kind, and the Book of Nod said to collect such stories, though no one he knows has ever seen a complete copy, and the scraps that exist come in a multitude of languages, and they often contradict each other, some appearing to be intentionally falsified. But among them all is a common thread. The biblical Cain, son of Adam and Eve, the first murderer, and referred to by some as the third man, was also the first vampire. Cast out of mortal society for killing his brother and cursed with eternal life and a hunger for blood, he wandered the wilderness for time untold until his name was forgotten. Eventually, he re-emerged and became the leader of a city known to Kindred as the First City, sometimes called Enoch, Uniac, or Enkiel. It is here that he created 3 progeny known as the Second Generation. They themselves begat their own progeny, though the number is unclear and depending on the account read numbered 9, 27, 100, or none at all. Cain forbade further creation, realizing perhaps what he had unleashed upon the world. The city was at peace until a great flood came upon the world and destroyed it. Cain believed this was a divine punishment sent to him for returning to the world of man and departed once more. He once again forbade his progeny from creating more of their kind and left them. They did not heed his decree. From this point, Cain faded from the world and was never seen again, though even into modern nights, some calling themselves Cain will periodically appear somewhere in the world. At times, they are revealed to be an imposter, but on other occasions, the individual vanishes as quickly as they appeared. Many believe he still lives, though others, Dracula included, believe these events are just some game of the elders. Either way, it is said Cain is steeped in the sorrow of what he had unleashed upon mankind. The second and third generations continued to produce progeny and ruled together for a time, though eventually the younger generations rose up and slew their sires, drinking their blood. Another great city was built, said to be ruled by the fourth generation, known now only as the Second City. Some believed it had been Babylon, while others suspect what is left of it lies beneath the sands of Egypt. This rule, too, was not without trouble. Some of the third generation remained, and it is believed that they were secretly behind the uprising to destroy the second generation. They decreed that only they would be allowed to create more of their kind, and any who disobeyed would be hunted and killed along with their progeny. While the fourth generation lived in the open, the remains of the third, known today as the Antediluvians, lived in secret and kept their havens hidden, ruling over the fourth this way for 2 millennia while the fourth ruled the city. Over time, the culture of the city grew decadent and the city began to die. The mortals rose up against their kindred rulers and slew any they could find. With the fall of the second city, its rulers were scattered to the far corners of the earth and there were too many for the third to control any longer. As they settled around the world, freed from the rule of their sires, the fourth generation begat the fifth generation. The account goes on to speak of a time, now long ago, when empires rose and were locked in battle. Persians, Greeks, Tartars, and more, all at the behest of the fifth, mirroring what had come before. Or perhaps these things happened at the behest of the third, who had already begun to play their great game. Whatever the truth, it is believed none yet live that could speak the truth of it. Dracula himself claims to have only ever met one of the fifth generation, and did not know it at the time. Near the end of this period, it is believed the Antediluvians rose and destroyed nearly all of their kind, leaving but a single progeny each, their lust for blood so strong they needed the blood of all that came after them. Legend states that this was the close of the second cycle. The prophecies that make up these myths state that each cycle lasts 2,300 years, and the current third cycle will soon come to a close. The Antediluvians sleep now, but they will rise again to nearly purge the world of their kind. This event is known as Gehenna, and some prepare for it fervently. Dracula, who refers to himself as a man of science, has his doubts. He goes on to state that those of the fifth generation and lower exist in nigh complete seclusion, being powerful and cunning and able to cover their tracks well. He names them Inkanu, and says they do this out of fear of one another. The sixth generation, of which Dracula is one, and lower are the bulk of the kindred in the world. He speaks of rumors of a 13th and even 14th generation, but dismisses them out of hand, speaking of the frailty such beings would have, and noting that the blood thins as it is passed from one generation to the next. Dracula goes on to talk of a time, beginning in 1435, that saw the destruction of a multitude of kindred, not at the hands of their progenitors, but at the hands of mortal kind, the Inquisition. Among the burning of many harmless old women, the Inquisition hit its true aim and destroyed many a genuine witch, warlock, and monster. This event brought a true fear of extinction to the kindred, and many who survived those times bear mental scars and are reluctant to enter the mortal world any longer. From this fear came the embrace of secrecy, leading to the rise of the Camarilla, and the calling of a great meeting to establish rules to govern their kind, which was held in 1486. Of the laws determined at this time, Dracula claims only one survived to modern nights, the first and most important of them, the Masquerade, something he willingly violates to put these words to paper. The goal was to convince the mortal world that all of vampire kind had been destroyed or, better yet, had never existed at all. All kindred must hide their nature around mortals, and to betray this secrecy would see them outcast and hunted down as a danger to all. Second to this was the need to turn humanity away from their superstitious leanings, and through this saw a helping hand directing them towards scientific pursuits and other academic leanings, helping to enlighten mortals as vampires themselves retreated to the shadows. Science had bred reason, and reason denied the existence of monsters. Dracula is quick to point out that though the Kindred guided mankind away from the superstitious, they were not puppets, and the hand of the Kindred was not in all of mankind's achievements or failings. Despite this, the mortal eye ever turns back to the supernatural and the mystic, and it has become harder to turn them away as time goes on. The Camarilla fights a war to do so, and the evidence is all around for those who know where to look. Dracula notes that much like in mortal society, the Kindred are seeing a generational gap between older Kindred and those made in the latter half of the current century who are often of a higher generation. Calling themselves anarchs, he says they seek to spurn the rule of princes and spurn the law of the Masquerade, desiring freedom above all else and performing acts that would force knowledge of the Kindred world into the sight of the mortals. Not taking kindly to these outbursts, many older Kindred find themselves in a near-constant state of war with these younger Kindred, with neither group willing nor able to trust the other. Dracula then waxes poetic about mortal views of vampires and their contradictory nature as written, being seen as both villain and hero, the incarnation of dark desires and the nobility of fairy tales, and so on. He muses that writers have often unwittingly stumbled across profound truths about his kind before suddenly taking them in a completely wrong direction. In particular, he mentions the French monk, Antoine Augustin Calmet, who wrote a treatise in the mid-1700s covering many areas of occultism, including vampires. Dracula notes that Calmet describes the way to kill a vampire being a stake through the heart, removal of the head, and burning of the remains, wryly pointing out that such a method, while effective, also kills mortals just as easily. He then describes the advent of motion pictures filtering this method down to merely staking, pointing out that this does not, in fact, work, and serves only to immobilize. He says that though burning or sunlight are effective, weapons of metal should have no faith placed in them. They can injure, but such wounds heal quickly for his kind. One thing the motion pictures got correct, he says, is sunlight. Only the oldest and strongest can withstand it even for a short length of time. Holy instruments, however, are generally useless. The one time he witnessed such things having an effect, he described that the wielder almost glowed with faith in the divinity, and concluded that in such an instance it was the person and not the instrument that made the difference, able to channel their true faith through the object. In addition, other folklore tied to vampire weaknesses holds no power, be it garlic, aconite, or running water, but is quick to note that there are rumors of a clan who bears such weakness to water and believes this is how many such rumors started over the ages. Such weaknesses have arisen in several bloodlines, which get passed down from sire to their childer. Moving on, Dracula speaks of the powers a vampire may be known for and the many wondrous things he has seen in his centuries, touching first on shapeshifting into various animal forms. Though this is possible, it is not common, and describes it as a power shown only by the rare breed known as Clan Gangrel, and from the incredibly old and most powerful of Kindred. Other powers that mortals might deem supernatural stem from a vampire's nature as a predator, as well as their ability to inspire fear, stillness, obedience, and other feelings, noting his own ability to dominate the will of others. He believes much of the confusion surrounding a vampire's abilities and weaknesses may be due to mistaken identity, noting that there exists a creature that bridges a gap between mortals and vampires, something the Kindred refer to as a ghoul, though he quickly states this is not the same as the legendary corpse-eating variety seen in some stories. Instead, they are what results when a mortal drinks the blood of a kindred without first being drained of their own. They are free to walk in the daylight and do not suffer the hunger that the kindred must deal with, but they do not age so long as they continue to feed on kindred blood and bear some of the superhuman strength and reflexes of his kind. Sometimes such servants are valuable and need not be human, stating that stories of hellhounds likely arise from such creatures. Though ghouls bear some of a vampire's strengths, they still have the same general frailty of other mortals and can be killed more easily than a vampire. He notes that many may falsely believe themselves to be vampires, and some widely believed weaknesses may come from these creatures as well, and claims that some react poorly to religious objects because they believe they are supposed to. Most ghouls, he says, know little more about the truth of a vampire's strengths and weaknesses than do normal mortals, and this is often because their master intentionally misled them. Many often suffer mental illnesses from the experiences inflicted upon them in their time serving vampires. Next, Dracula comes to the creation of a vampire, called the Embrace. He continues to use popular media as an example and points out the ridiculousness of the idea that anyone bitten by a vampire will become one, or that those who die by suicide or had been an oathbreaker in life, etc., could become one. Such methods would have seen the world overrun with vampires long ago. Instead, a body must be drained completely of blood and then given the blood of a vampire to feed on. Even the smallest drop upon the lips will animate them and cause them to seek out more, drinking from their soon-to-be sire to complete the process. He speaks of his own embrace, noting that the act of being drained was one of the most peaceful experiences of his life, causing no pain and drifting away, but that what came after was more harrowing and excruciating than anything he had ever experienced. Even tortures wrought upon him as a prisoner of the Turks could not compare. Drinking blood was the only thing that even began to abate the pain, and he thanks the powers that be that he was not in a city when it happened, or chaos would have ensued. He could have killed his own family in that moment to sate the pain caused by that hunger, and prayed for death. Even now, centuries later, the extent of that pain remains fresh in his mind. He describes the events as something that he was not expecting, something that will change in later editions, and his brain railed at the knowledge of what was happening, speaking of being a man of education and reason who had discarded such superstitious fairy tales. What followed, he claims, was too distressing to continue to recollect. With that, Dracula comes to the anatomical matters of a vampire, stating that literature and film display a number of truths here. The canine teeth are sharpened and longer to facilitate feeding, but notes that they extend only when the time comes to do so, otherwise they are withdrawn in their sockets via the contraction of a flexible tissue at their base. It is said that there are some that exist that do not have this ability, but they are a dying breed, as it makes it much harder to hide from humanity. In addition, the pale complexion of the vampire also holds true, contributed to by their aversion to sunlight and arrested state of death, in addition to the lack of the blood in one's veins. The hair and nails continue to grow for a few short days after embrace, but then also stop, as it is as if they are frozen in time at the point of their death. Damage that is healed returns them to this state, and any changes one wishes to make to hair or nails from time of death must be made nightly. He believes the body is in fact dead, but decay is arrested by the power of the embrace, noting the skin is a little tighter on muscle and bone, similar to that of a fresh corpse. The hunger is, to put it plainly, the drive for food. In addition, real food that one may have enjoyed in life is no longer edible, having lost the ability to digest anything. He believes the internal organs wither, and notes that one seldom sees a stout vampire, and nearly all remark on a newfound slenderness after the embrace. This is also changed in future editions. Along with this, the body is incapable of producing its own blood and must be replenished from an outside source. The decay of death may be arrested, but it returns quickly if the vampire is destroyed, as though time is reclaiming the debt it is owed. This results in many vampires ending up as dust upon death, making much of this information based on conjecture due to the inability to dissect and inspect it for the truth. In addition, breathing is no longer necessary, though many fake it when among mortals. He believes that oxygen from the blood of a victim aids in sustaining the dead tissues of a vampire, and admonishes the young and foolish who might try to feed from the jugular of a victim, as it is where the spent, deoxygenated blood resides. It is the carotid artery that one should aim for to get the best blood. So too does the heart no longer work. He questions the method through which blood moves through a vampire, suspecting it is some sort of osmosis, as you could cut the veins of a vampire open and find no blood. But still, it must move through the body, as should a vampire cry, and he notes it is something they do more often than mortals may suspect. It is blood that they weep instead of tears. Despite the lack of blood in the veins, a vampire will often have a noticeable rosy hue shortly after feeding. Vampires are also able to heal themselves with remarkable speed. They do still feel pain, however, and infliction of an injury will often produce a small amount of blood as the body reacts instinctively to such things as it did in life. Thus, bruising can still also occur. The exception to this is the act of staking a vampire through the heart, which causes a state of complete paralysis. He is uncertain why this is, considering the heart does not even work any longer, and most explanations offered to him have been of a mystical nature and beyond his understanding. Finally, he speaks lightly of the concept of vampires as a potent figure of romance, but notes that though vampires of any sex can go through the motions of physical intimacy, willing their blood to the necessary places to make everything work, the drive, instincts, and response that go with such died with the body. Romance of an emotional nature is still possible, but the ecstasy of the kiss, feeding, has wholly subsumed physical pleasure. Next, Dracula attempts to describe the hunger, noting that mortals may experience hunger, even starvation, but that neither even begins to compare to the hunger a vampire experiences. Blood is a drug that they are wholly addicted to from their birth, and it puts to shame the drive and need of nearly every aspect of mortal life. Food, drink, reproduction, ambition, security. It is all of these things and more, personified into one ever-present fixation. The act of feeding is survival and a sort of physical, mental, and spiritual ecstasy all rolled into one, overshadowing even the most intense pleasure a mortal could ever feel. Beyond the hunger lurks the beast. To deny the hunger enrages the beast, and only feeding and willpower keep it in check. Thus, monstrous acts are required to keep from becoming monsters in truth. And with that, the famous words oft repeated through VtM history appear for the first time. Monsters we are, lest monsters we become. It is the paradox and curse of the vampire. Dracula delves further into the nature of the beast. It rages ever on, and the mind is a thin cage for it to throw itself against. The strong-willed can hold it at bay for longer than some, but it gnaws at the mind like a rat at a rope. Over decades and centuries, it is not a matter of if it gets out, but when, leaving behind a sense of guilt and regret in its wake when eventually recaptured. It haunts the kindred for the rest of their days as the fear it will happen again strains the remains of their humanity and claws at their sanity. As ages pass and the flame of humanity dwindles, the beast comes ever closer to being the victor. When it claims control in full, then a monster you have truly become with no way to return. The only way out of this predicament is the near mythical ideal of Golconda, a way to seek true balance between one's humanity and the beast, halting the descent into madness and safeguarding the vampire's humanity. Dracula claims to have met only a meager few who appear to have achieved this state. He then talks about the immortality of the vampire and their agelessness, but specifies that it is not without its dangers. Despite being undying, time is one of the kindred's greatest enemies. Loved ones die as you stay young, and you become unable to stay in one place for too long without raising the suspicions of the mortals. The guilt of the death you leave behind you is one way for the madness to seep in, but detaching yourself wholly from the mortal world can let the same madness in through another door. As time marches relentlessly on, the ways for the madness to lay claim and your humanity to erode become ever more constant, with the beast lying in wait for you to reach the end of your rope. Despite this, age brings greater power to the kindred, and with age also comes the cunning of surviving for untold years. Yet this creates further fear of losing oneself and being nigh unstoppable, leading the oldest of kindred to detach themselves from others to try and exist in solitude out of fear and paranoia of when they'll finally lose control. The dangers of the sun are not the only reason kindred are nocturnal. This is also the best time to hunt. Dracula notes that though mortals have trouble seeing in the dark, many kindred have no such issue. In addition, many mortals are reaching the end of their day and are fatigued and more easily preyed upon, while the vampire is fresh and rested. There are also fewer mortals around as people head home for the evening, making it harder to be caught as feeding is one of the kindred's most vulnerable points when the beast is close to the surface. Mistakes related to this have been the undoing of many young vampires. Here, Dracula describes the hidden world of vampires that exist within and alongside the mortal world. He uses the analogy of a king in his forest with the beasts and notes that they have their castles and such to be with their own kind. Likewise, the kindred keep their own places to interact with others of their kind, and any city of sufficient population likely has a number of them, and just as cities have communities and government leaders to dictate how society will function, so does the vampire world have clans and princes for such the same purpose. The prince of a city or territory sets the rules by which it is governed, and it is expected that a kindred entering a domain for the first time must introduce themselves to the prince or suffer dire consequences. Many kindred seek to become a prince themselves, as it is the only safe way to create a brood of your own. The prince decides who may embrace within a domain and will often limit other kindred to one at most, while they themselves can create many. While most princes seek to keep peace in their domains, there are exceptions. One such he refers to as a league of clans calling themselves the Sabbat, or the Black Hand, who revel in violence and their perverse and bestial natures, shunned by most of their kind. They are what mortals fear vampires to be, and they control much of eastern North America. Opposite these creatures stands the Camarilla, where individual domains ruled by princes could be seen as regional or national governments. The Camarilla then stands as something akin to the League of Nations. Dracula finds them approximately as effective as that body, but notes that he may soon test the theory in truth with the words he puts to paper. He notes that the leader of the Council of the Camarilla are very old and very powerful, each in their own right. They put heavy stock in the traditions of old, and in particular the Masquerade. The clans have shifting allegiances that change much like the alliances of nations, and though some rules may be broken on occasion, there is something stronger than such things, stronger even than the natural ties of blood, which is known as the blood bond. The power of a kindred's blood works even on other kindred, and though the blood of another vampire is the sweetest tasting of all blood, it comes with it a dire consequence. Drinking from the same kindred on 3 occasions creates a bond stronger than that of sire and child, and indeed many vampire will force their children into a blood bond after creation. To be willingly bound to another is to give them your heart and mind in full, and should not be undertaken lightly. Dracula speaks of rumors that though the blood imparts immortality, as the ages pass, the blood will ultimately lose its inherent potency and must eventually be fueled by stronger blood. Where a newly made vampire may subsist on animal blood if so desired, age eventually causes this to lose its sustaining power. Likewise, even more extreme age leads to loss of sustenance from even mortal blood, leaving only the blood of other kindred. It is said the antediluvians prey on other kindred for this very reason. However, rumors spread that even younger kindred have begun to do this as well. He questions whether this is because the newest generation have blood that is not as robust as those of old and it fades in power sooner, or because they note the power of the antediluvians and seek to emulate them and gain more power for themselves. Thus, the ever-violent cycle of the jihad, the war of ages that sees the old and young exist in conflict and distrust. It is noted again that the blood bond does not work in reverse. A child cannot bond their sire, and in similar fashion, the antediluvians bear no such risk from feeding on kindred. Similarly, those who habitually feed on their own kind fear no such bond, for if they destroy that which they feed on, there is nothing to be bound to. Due in part to this fact, the act, known as Diablerie in modern nights, is seen as a shocking and perverted thing to most kindred. Any who is known to be a diabolus may be killed outright by any who find them. The elders, he claims, deny rumors of the act outright, but this is to be expected. Admitting to it would surely ignite a revolution as terrible as the rise of the 4th generation. There is evidence of its truth, however. Dracula closes his document once more saying how he regrets his actions in the past and hopes the writings help her to understand what caused them. He does not ask for forgiveness, but hopes that Mina may take pity and pray for him. With these texts, she now knows more about vampire kind than any mortal living, more even than the illustrious Van Helsing who sought to destroy him. He states that he has changed much, and through much soul-searching believes he is close to reaching the fabled Golconda. He tells her to do whatever she chooses with his writings, though it could likely lead to the destruction of his kind. It is her decision to make. Whatever that decision may be, he wishes her and her family well, and says she will hear from him no more unless she wishes it. He signs the document, "Your most devoted and penitent servant, VT." The section ends with a quote. "Now, reader, I have told my dream to thee. See if thou canst interpret it to me, or to thyself or neighbor, but take heed of misinterpreting, for that instead of doing good will but thyself abuse by misinterpreting evil issues." John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. The quote is taken from The Pilgrim's Progress from This World to That Which Is to Come, a Christian allegory for the spiritual journey from earth to heaven, and was written by John Bunyan in the late 17th century. It is regarded as the first novel written in English. Following this, we are met with a black 2-page spread that greets the reader, pencil drawings of a man leaning against a brick wall on one side and a moonlit tower on the other. A short story describes a first-person perspective of being fed on by a vampire, the ecstasy of the kiss as they begin to fade, and the sudden flare of heat as they are brought back from death by the embrace. The joy of feeding, and the pain of the blood being taken from them as their sire disappears as suddenly as they appeared, leaving them all alone with the darkness. This be death, the unmaking.